I mean, it's not, I know there's larger issues that I remain concerned about overall in terms of the overall culture of the organization, but the negotiations tomorrow are specifically over the impact of the IHP regulations and policy, correct?
Over the impact of their decisions with implementing that, that's correct. Those decisions are not up for negotiations, but the impact of those decisions are.
And so can you identify what are the impacts that you see for correctional staff with respect to the implementation of the policy? And if you would comment on the concerns that you may have, I know that you've expressed to me as well, with respect to correctional officers still working without a contract.
Well, I've got to tell you, I can just start with, I heard something different than what I read, in that the housing decision will be made, or it begins in the receiving and release area. Now, I don't know who is going to be responsible for following up on that paperwork when an inmate says, I'm not going to sell with anybody else, or I'm not going to sell with anybody from another race, or that. I don't know who's responsible for writing that paperwork, delivering it, typing it up. I don't know if all of the office assistants have been put in place in the R&R that are supposed to be there, consistent with their budget plan. With regard to the training, as I stated earlier, I don't know how long that training actually is. I don't know if it took the full 2 hours. I don't know if they held first watch staff over after 2 hours. I don't know how they actually operated the institution. I know that in Mr. Clay's memo it says that they're going to reduce to first watch staffing. I don't know what that means with regard to Sierra or any other institution.
Have you received questions from correctional officers that you represent from Mule Creek or Sierra?
Not as of this moment, no. But again, it just occurred here in the last week. We had the holiday in there, last 10 days or so. 24th and 26th, I believe, are the dates on the memorandum. Again, we haven't gotten an opportunity to have feedback. This is the first I saw of their lesson plan. I don't believe that was provided in the notice. And I don't believe it says that post orders were provided as well. I don't believe we have post orders because I believe those are still being developed. They generally don't have post orders signed when they come to us, and generally when we get those as well, they're stamped draft, which means that anything's subject to change. And that's one of the problems with them not signing an agreement is we don't really know what they're going to implement or when they're going to implement it. I don't know that you got a hard answer on some of your questions today that you pressed on, like a date that it's actually going to begin. I don't know who's responsible for what, and ordinarily we would get that through the negotiation process, except we don't have a contract and they don't feel the need to provide us with that information. They'll show up, tell us, here's what we're going to do. You have any questions, give us those that we think have impact, and then we're going to go home.
What are some of the critical considerations you believe are necessary for successful implementation of Phase 2 when it finally does get started? And I think part of that is looking at, if you can give us an observation of the status of race relations from a line officer's point of view in our prison system today. What do we need to be aware of?
Well, I think that in fairness, that some of we are racially integrated at some levels with regard to at least the open dorm housings. We have inmates of all races living in all the dorms. What's changing is that the bunk that they actually live in now, again, the double selling or the 200% selling, that is what they're talking about changing. Now, we're going to do it through attrition, so there's not going to be a very significant change anytime soon. The change that you're going to see is in the parole population that continues to churn and churn. Guys that are doing life without, if they're currently living in segregated status, unless they get bus therapy or moved on somewhere else, that's not going to change for them. They're going to continue to live segregated, based on my reading of this. It's not going to affect incumbents, for lack of a better term. So I see it having, I think that the problem is going to be when we do things like, because we still do in the system, racially segregated lockdowns. We do them by race. Southern Mexicans are locked down. The African Americans are locked down. I don't know how you do that when you've only got when you got two different races living in one cell and how you keep those issues of pressure from coming up. I don't know what the federal system does, or Texas for that matter. I think that they may have a different format for locking institutions down. When they lock them down, they lock them down. We try to avoid those terms, and we do something called modified programming for all the Hispanic inmates or all the black inmates. I don't know how those are going to be affected, only because that information is not provided in any of these documents. I'd like to ask those questions. We do in-cell feeding sometimes with specific races. I don't know how you do that with one inmate being of a different race in that cell. I don't know if you let one out. I don't know what they're planning on doing. I don't know as an officer if I've been given this bed change and the inmate's telling me on his way there that he doesn't want to go in that cell. What words do I have to hear before I make it stop? Is it I don't want to? I'm not going to? At what point do you want me to make that decision that, wait a minute, I've got to take this guy back, I'm not going to put him.
You are watching the California Channel, an independent, nonprofit, public affairs cable television network. Our broadcast hours are 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., Monday through Friday.